Hello, I'm Steve Hemmond from the Massachusetts Association of Regional Schools, MARS. As part of our professional development program, we are producing video clips that will present different aspects about the operation of a regional school district from the viewpoint of school committee members, superintendent, business managers, and staff. This program is titled Chart of Accounts, Reporting Revenue and Expenditure Data. For this program, we have Stacy Jackson and Julie Kelly. Stacy is a former member of the Wachusett Regional School District Committee, and Julie is a former Wachusett School Committee member also. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Stacy Jackson and Julie Kelly.
Thank you, Steve. Today's presentation will describe the general requirements for reporting revenue and expenditure data from school committee appropriation, municipal spending in support of the schools, revolving and special funds, and state and federal grants and contracts. Each school district shall report the following revenue and expenditures as required in the annual end-of-the-year financial report in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 72, Section 3. Next slide, please. We have a chart of accounts, and under the chart of accounts, there are a number of main appropriation categories. These are the categories under expenditures. And these are the categories that you're going to be discussing at your school committee meetings, at your business and finance subcommittee meetings, when you're going through budget development. These are the main categories that school committee is ultimately responsible for. And as the budget season goes on, you want to be addressing any increases or decreases to these categories. We'll go through and we'll discuss each category in detail. And you certainly have the authority as a school committee member to go through and drill down and get more into the weeds of it and get more into the subcategories, but ultimately your role is managing those expenditure categories, those 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 series. Another thing to keep in mind as a school committee member is you are responsible for approving appropriation transfers between appropriation categories. So for example, your business manager, your superintendent would have the authority to move money from one subcategory to another within a certain appropriation category. For example, under instructional services, they could move money from a substitute line item to a full-time employee line item if it's within that appropriation subcategory. However, if you're moving money from, for example, operations and maintenance to instructional services, something like that where you're going to the main appropriation category, that needs a school committee authorization before that transfer can take place. So for example, if you're running into a tight budget and you have a challenging season, if you're spending more money on maintenance costs or utilities costs, if it's been a tough winter and your utility costs are really up, you might need to put a freeze on instructional supplies. So you might need to go to school committee meeting and make an authorization to move money from operations and maintenance over to instructional supplies. Any of those transfers also need to be approved by school committee and completed prior to July 15th.
A couple of the line items that you want to pay attention to throughout the fiscal year is your salaries and instructional services line item for your substitute teachers. It's not something that you can control, but it is something that can very easily go over budget. Hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, that's an area that you're going to need to move other money from other line items to cover. Steve can talk about what time of year you usually see an increase.
Well, usually you want to track those things on a monthly basis and probably at least quarterly go to the school committee with any changes that you need to make for transfers. But again, giving budget reports on a monthly basis and watching that very carefully. And what we saw with those expenditures, the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, those are sometimes referred as the legal lines, and that's only the school committee can make those transfers, not the business manager or the superintendent.
If we go back to the slides, we have an example of if we go to the next slide, we have an example of some legal lines as well as some of the subcategories under there. So again, what you see highlighted in yellow, those are the main appropriation categories, and then the other lines on there are the subcategories under that. So again, the business manager, superintendent can move money within the subcategories, but school committee needs to authorize any movement of money between those main highlighted ones. And next slide, please. Now, to drill down and talk about some of these appropriation categories a little further, the first one, the 1000 series, is district leadership and administration. And what would fall under here are expenses coming out of the superintendent's office, more district-wide type expenses, something like technology that's going to affect the total district, not something that's going to be going into the school, but these are district-wide appropriations. You'd see any school committee costs under there, and any legal fees are going to be under the 1000 series. Under 2000 series, that's where you have the bulk of your teaching staff, all the salaries under there, and that includes teaching staff, any paraprofessionals, pretty much all of your staffing are under there, including substitutes and stipend positions as well. Also could include professional development, curriculum planning, and then the school technology, anything that's going to instruct students and help with that. And again, this is an area that you really need to keep a close eye on, really need to look at, especially you could see, substitute line items, those subcategory items really increase if you have a lot of teachers going out on sick leave or maternity leave. So those are things that you really need to keep a close eye on and monitor those very carefully. The 3000 series are other services that are not instructional, and these are things that would involve like the health office, all your nursing services, any athletics if it's under the general fund, student activities, and any security. Next slide, please. Continuing on, the 4000 series would be your operations and maintenance. This is your buildings and grounds, your maintenance costs, your custodial costs, and utilities. So that's a pretty sizable appropriation category as well, and again, one that needs to be monitored very carefully. Utility costs can really change, especially with the weather, and maintenance costs, these are things that can come out of nowhere sometimes. Things happen in a school, they need to be repaired. So that's one that you need to be keeping a close eye on as well. The 5000 series would be fixed charges, and that's all of your benefits and retirement charges on there. Usually those should be steady for most of the year, but where you really need to watch that is during open enrollment times, and make sure that what you predicted during your open enrollment is actually what came to fruition, and if it's not, then adjustments might be needed in that category. The 6000 series is community services, and that's anything that's supporting the community as a whole. Not all districts use that 6000 series, so it might be different for different districts. Moving on to the next slide. The 7000 series are acquisition, improvement, and replacement of fixed assets. And these are typically, especially in a regional school district, these are district-owned buildings. These might be a central office, they might be a preschool, they might be a regional high school. So again, most of the schools are typically owned by the town, but sometimes in a regional district, the district does have their own assets as well. The 8000 series would be long-term debt, principal, and interest. Again, if you had a construction project, did renovations on one of your district-owned assets, you might have taken out some debt for that. And then the 9000 series is programs with other school districts, so that's tuition to the other schools. So again, that's another area that you need to keep a close eye on as well. And then Julie's going to talk about the revenue side of things.
Can we go to the next slide, please? So your revenue classification will include your general fund receipts, which is your regional school district assessments, which is the assessments the towns pay to the district, which include MLC and the amount, transportation, any amount over that that you ask and you agree to in your budget season. That is dictated by regional agreement. It could be quarterly, it could be a few times a year, but that would be categorized under your general fund receipt. It also includes tuition receipts if you have programs in your district that you tuition students in from other districts. That would go to your general fund receipt. Transportation fees if you charge a fee for transportation. Earning on investments, which is your treasurer is charged with investing your funds and making sure you're getting a good return on the money that you have throughout the year. That goes there. Rental fees, medical care and assistance, your E-rate receipts, and other general fund revenue. And the cash value of all non-revenue receipts. Your state aid receipts are your Chapter 70 and your money from MSBA for school, everything that, even though the town built it, the money goes through the district and it goes into your state aid receipts, and you serve as pass-through to go back to the town for school buildings and construction. Regional transportation receipts, circuit breaker, school choice, and anything else coming from the state. Can we go to the next slide, please? Also, you have your state and federal grant receipts. The grants have to be very carefully handled and separately designated. Your auditors pay particular attention to your federal grants, and they conduct a separate audit of that. You do not want a material finding based on the way you handled and classified the receipts that you received from that. So accounting practices for your federal grants are very important, and they should be designated under the state and federal grant receipts. Your revolving and special fund receipts is also should be separate from your general fund, and it includes your school lunch receipts, your athletic and other student body receipts, tuition receipts for school choice, or actually I said school choice in the other one, but actually it's in revolving accounts, adult education, community school programs, out-of-district tuitions or summer school, other local receipts such as culinary art programs, insurance reimbursements, law school books, things along that nature that is allowed by DOR. And private receipts shall include all non-governmental grants or gifts. Your revolving of funds should be set up separately. They don't commingle. They don't go into the same big pot of money. The accounting for each should be meticulous and specific. Your scholarship and gift funds, your fiduciary accounting should be also meticulous and not accounted for separately. Steve?
One of the things I would like to point out, and I'm going back a little bit on expenditure classifications, under the 9,000 series that regional school districts have to be very careful about is to make sure they budget for school choice out students as well as charter school out. So that would go under your 9,000 series. You have to be very careful, make sure those are budgeted correctly, because there will be charges to the school district. And as Julie just said about the revenue funds and all of the requirement counts, that you have to keep track of those funds separately and they can't commingle them. Next slide, please.
So your revolving accounts are funds for a certain purpose. So you collect funds, and the amount that you collect is specifically to run that program for, like, athletics or for cafeteria or your full day kindergarten tuition and things along that nature. It's very specific. You collect the money throughout the year and you spend the money in that year. They're maintained in separate accounts, and the accounting for which is separate and meticulously overseen. A motion is required at the school committee to set up a revolving accounts, and there's only certain categories that you're allowed to by DOR to set up as a regional school district. Funds are expended for the purpose for which they were collected, so you can't use cafeteria to cover athletics. It's specific for that. You can't use those funds. You can't. That's an area where in your general fund you can, if you're in a deficit, you can move one line item over to another. You cannot do that in revolving accounts. Revolving accounts should never go negative. You have to have the funds into the account before you can approve the appropriation to spend out of the account. There's only one account that's allowed to go in negative, and that's the cafeteria account, because it is dependent on federal funds that come in throughout the year. So they do allow that account to go negative, but I do caution you that's an account you want to watch closely, and we'll go over that in a subsequent presentation.
And I would just like to add on that cafeteria account, at the end of the year, it does have to be has to be positive, and the reason go negative is a lag, as Julie just said, federal money coming in. But also, if a revolving account money got accidentally spent out of that, and there's another income coming in, the district is responsible to make sure that fund is zero, and sometimes districts will have to appropriate money to those particular revolving accounts. It should not happen, but it has happened in cases, but the region is responsible to make sure it goes to zero at the end of the fiscal year.
we're going to go over the budget reports that you should be receiving as a school committee member and a superintendent from your business office, which should monitor that throughout the year. But it's very important. That's an area that you need to watch closely because you are responsible to put that back in the black at closeout. And if it's running in the red throughout the year, you don't want to find that out at the closeout. One big thing is that revolving accounts are not savings accounts. The money received into the account should be spent within that fiscal year. So if you're seeing really large year-end balances, you should be asking very detailed questions about the purpose of the account, the amount of fees being collected, and their use. And also, as I stated before, expenditures cannot be approved on revolving accounts unless funds are in the account to cover the expenditure.
And I would add on the revolving accounts that money can carry forward, but you should be spending for what you collected during that year. However, it can be carried forward, and in some cases, like athletic revolving, some districts go by, the money is built up and then it's used for the next year because they collected it, so they try to make sure that they have money in that. So there is some latitude that can be doing it, but you don't want building up large sums of money there. They should be used during the year for which they were collected.
So the next slide. And that's an example of a list of revolving accounts and special funds that a school district may have. Every district is different, especially with a vocational district, which have different types of revolving accounts. But that's just one example of the type of accounts that you can have.
And I would add on these things, there's a law that allows each of these to be set up. So the law has to allow you to set it up, and then the superintendent, business manager, go to the school committee, receive authorization to set it up. And then it can be a revolving account that can go in year after year. You only have to go once to the school committee to have it set up, but there has to be a law that says you can establish this account.
Wrap up, Steve.
Okay. First, I would like to thank Julie and Stacy for the presentation on this, on the chart of accounts. This is the first one in there because the second piece for this one we'll be doing is another clip is about budget reports. But we felt you needed to understand what the chart of accounts are, what accounts are, and then when the reports start coming, then you'll understand clearly what you're looking for. And it's important that school superintendents, business managers produce these reports on a regular basis so that they see if there's heading for concern, and also then the school committee then to take some action. So that will be our next clip. Thank you very much.